Metadata is one of those terms you're going to read about and hear about out there. You could see it on the exam as well. So let's talk in this video about using metadata, and I'll show you where you can find it out there in the Management Studio. And then we're going to do separate videos on the 3 most common ways of accessing metadata. But first, let's answer a question that you're probably asking, some of you are anyway, and that is, what is metadata? Metadata is data about data. Let's think of it this way. SQL Server 2012 is a relational database management system. Now that means that databases that we create are managed by SQL Server 2012. And the databases that we create have a structure, they are objects, there's a lot of things interconnected there. And SQL Server allows us to access the structure of our databases and objects with queries, just like we can access the data in our databases and objects. So we can access data about how our data is stored and how it's being managed. So what kind of information can we find out there in metadata? Well, a question like, I need to see a list of all the tables in the database. I need a list of all the stored procedures in the database. I need a list of the columns in a particular table. I need the data types of the columns that are in a table. I need to know the primary key column or columns in a table. And all those questions can be answered. Now, SQL Server 2012 provides 3 methods for querying metadata. But before we talk about those, let's answer one more question. Why would I really need to question the database to see, for example, if there is a certain column in a table or if there's a certain table in the database? Well, I may have a stored procedure that's going to add a column. The first thing I want to do is make sure, is that column already there? I also might want to run a query that's based on that column being there. And so rather than run the query and tax the database, I want to check to see if that particular column's there before I execute the query. When you're trying to really automate what's going on with SQL Server in the background through things like stored procedures and so forth, a lot of times you do want to access metadata to further automate the whole process and to verify what's out there. And that's a way to look and see programmatically what's out there, is by using that metadata. So the 3 methods for querying metadata in SQL Server 2012 are catalog views, information schema views, and system stored procedures. Now, if you've been around SQL Server for a few versions, you're probably already a little bit confused about these because different solutions have come along at different times, and they've all been touted as the great new thing, and it just kind of seems like they bleed over to each other, and one moves up to number 1 and one moves down, then another one moves up and so forth. And that is what's happened, but I'll explain that as we go through the 3 different methods here, but we'll do that in separate videos for each one. What I want to do now is jump out to the Management Studio and show you where you can find these. If I go into databases, and if I go into my AdventureWorks database, and then go into views, you'll notice system views right here. Well, if I expand that, you'll notice the information schema views are very easy to recognize, right? They say information schema right on the front, kind of like villains in Batman, right? And so these are easy to see, and we'll take a look at those in a separate video and do some examples. These that start with sys down here, okay? Notice sys columns. These are your catalog views. And so we'll talk about those, and then, let me scroll back up here. Let's go down to programmability and go into stored procedures, and you will see system stored procedures right here, and they all start with sys.sp_. We'll do one on, let me scroll way down here. You can see how many system stored procedures there are. There's hundreds of these things. And I'll just keep going. Getting close, I promise. Space used. We're going to use that one in an example a little bit later on, but I wanted you to see it here. So that's what we're going to look at. So join me, and we're going to do a separate video on catalog views, information schema views, and the system stored procedures.